On this episode of This is Game Boy Lite, it's 1989. Grab your Walkman and let's jam. Hello everyone, welcome to Lite episode number 57. I am eBloodyCandy or EBC, and it's been a while since I've done a Lite episode, and this Lite episode is extremely late. We'll go over all that stuff in a bit later, but things I have been up to. I played Kolana, Kolana. I don't know how to pronounce the name, but it's on the Game Boy Advance. Pretty cool game. Definitely difficulty curve towards the end is pretty dumb, but it's actually a really fun game. Don't know much about the franchise or the series at all. First time I ever played the game. But I definitely want to check out the other games in the series. I've been playing Kirby's Return to Dreamland, so the re-release of Return to Dreamland for the Switch. I've been playing a lot of the mini games as I haven't been streaming nearly as much as I wanted to, so the story has been put on hold. I did Platinum Hogwarts Legacy, finally. So that's been shelved now. Obviously, WoW Classic. I don't play WoW nearly as much as I used to. I still sign in once in a while for the raids. I've been playing... I briefly played Mario Kart for the Game Boy Advance. I did the 50cc for it. That game's controls, like, the maps are really good. I like the racetracks and the maps. But the controls, man, are tough, especially when you're used to playing the newer Mario Kart games where you like drift and you can control your drift. Man, the GBA is another beast in itself. But the tracks are very good. I've been playing Mario Party GBA as well too. I don't understand Mario Party on the Game Boy Advance. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to understand how it works, but it's not like a normal Mario Party that I've played before. So I'm trying to figure out how that game plays. On top of that, I've been playing Mario Golf on the Switch. I typically do the online play for rankings and whatnot. And I've been just playing the Game Boy on the Switch, so a month or so ago, if you have a Nintendo online subscription, you have access to Game Boy Color. And if you have the expansion pack to the online subscription, you have access to the Game Boy Advance. I played Kirby's Dream Land. I played a few others just to see how they kind of played. I've been playing a game called Alone in the Dark for the Game Boy Color. It's actually a pretty interesting game. I'm kind of lost in it right now, but it's actually pretty fun. But that's really all I've been up to for playing games. Like I said, I want to try and finish Kirby soon. I want to get into some of the long play stuff again. It's just been really busy. But this episode is going to be a little bit different. Instead of covering a game, I know a while back that Mo and I talked about kind of us in general, like who we are, but I wanted to go back and have a Game Boy or like retro game retrospective from the eyes of me growing up in the 80s and 90s. So with that, we're going to take a bit of a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about everyone's little favorite handheld, the Game Boy. Alright, welcome back everyone. So, the Game Boy was released April 21st, 1989 in Japan, July 31st, 1989 in the US, and September 28th, 1990 in Europe. Other countries got it as well too, around 89 and 90 as well. But for the sake of the podcast, we're going to cover the three main countries that we typically do cover. The lifespan of the Game Boy was stretched from 1989 to 2003. Price of it at launch for Japan was 12,500 yen, 89.99 US dollars, or 69.99 in pounds. Worldwide units sold is 118.69 million units. This includes the Play It Loud edition, the Pocket edition, the Lite, and the Color. Obviously developed and published by Nintendo, with some various launch titles along with the Game Boy as well. Crazily enough, North America would have the most launch titles available to them right out of the gate. So games like Alleyway, Baseball, and Super Mario Land were available for all three regions at the launch of the Game Boy. Games like Tennis was only available in North America. Tetris was only available in North America and Europe. And a game called Yakuman was available in Japan. A little bit of an interesting fact with the Tetris thing, because I know some people are like, well, Tetris was a pack-in game for the Game Boy. Yes, it was. You are correct on that. However, it was released in not 1998. That's Tetris DX. It was released in Japan in the same year as a pack-in title, but not at the initial launch of the Game Boy. I don't know why DX is on here. Weird. Nintendo DX. But yeah, so this game actually came out in June 14th of 1989. So about a couple months after the initial release of the Game Boy. So, yes, Tetris did come out for the Game Boy in 1989 in Japan, but it was not a launch title for the Game Boy itself, although it did become a pack-in title with the Game Boy eventually. So, just because Tetris was the most popular game at the time. But yeah, like I said, this is going to be a bit of a different type of episode. We're just so busy right now in our personal lives. Mo is working again and doing his own thing. I have taken more responsibilities at work, and I've been focusing more on my health lately. Legs has been focusing on a lot of other projects with her friends, so our light episodes have been pretty lacking and kind of wondering, and even our main episodes are kind of been a little late coming out, and we've just been very busy, and we've been trying to fit this into our schedules, all while trying to focus just on real life in general right now. But with all that said, I wanted to take some time. I took some time. I scanned through our list of episodes, and like I said, I saw the episode that we had of like who is Moelle, who is EBC. You know, we have those episodes of getting like a bit of an insight on like us as a person, and not just a podcast personality. But we never really discussed the Game Boy and our upbringing with it. I know Mo has talked a lot about his growing up with the Game Boy throughout the years and the many episodes that we've done. And I know a lot of our listeners of this podcast are around mine and Mo's age, you know, born in the 80s and 90s and kind of grew up with it or have some sort of connection or nostalgia with seeing or hearing some of that old stuff from our childhood. But we also have listeners whose first handheld might have been the Nintendo DS or the 3DS, or their first home console was a PS2. And that's kind of the audience that this light episode is probably going to cater more towards. Because in this episode, I wanted to kind of share the retro experience with those that never had the chance to experience what life was like in the quote unquote retro times. Um, this is all going to be through my perspective. Everyone's lives are very different, especially when they're children. But I wanted to share some of my favorite memories and some of just some more background of like where I kind of come from and where the Game Boy kind of fits in with my life. So with that, we're going to take a big leap backwards about 30 plus years now. So if Legs is going to do a little whooshy sound, a little, that's the way to put it. But we don't want to go too far back because in 1989, I was 2 years old. I'm not going to remember anything when I'm two. And B, I'm probably not going to be playing a Game Boy when I'm two. So we're going to stop the clock at 1991, where I'm 4 or 5 years old at this point. So, kind of at this point, I have memories. I very much vividly remember my childhood, which is a blessing and a curse all at the same time. But it's 1991, and we are diving into the world of video games. If you are diving into the world of video games, Nintendo is where you're going to want to be. Nintendo was everywhere. Whether it was watches, posters, TV shows, movies, comics, you name it, Nintendo probably had its name on it or was somehow involved in a product similar to that. Nintendo, Mario, Zelda, like they were everywhere. It was a huge pop culture thing. If you're playing if you're playing video games at this time, chances are you were playing the NES. You were playing the OG Nintendo Entertainment System, where you're probably either playing games like Super Mario Brothers, you're playing Legend of Zelda, Contra, Castlevania. If you're one of the weird ones, you're playing Crystallis or but a lot of times, like when you're playing the games, like you have friends over as well too. So like if you're playing Super Mario Brothers 1, like you're racing to get through World 8, and save Princess Peach from Bowser, or you're putting in the quote unquote infinite lives cheat code into Contra, to co-op through Contra to blast anything that's coming across your screen. The 80s and 90s was all about action, and it was all about Nintendo. If you watched the Terminator, you wanted to play the Terminator. If you watched Rambo, you played a game that was named Rambo. Because the game Rambo for the NES is not Rambo. Unfortunately, though, there's a few things that would prohibit you from playing the NES. One was your homework done? So if you're at that point in your life where you had homework from school, you had to make sure it was done. And two, was anyone watching the TV? So I grew up in a household where the TV was pretty much on all day and most of the night. And I grew up in a household where we only had one TV for the most part. My parents and I watched a lot of TV. My mother watched a lot of soap operas during the day. I watched a lot of movies. I didn't care for much like the TV shows. Like I watched my Saturday morning cartoons. I watched my Turtles. I watched my GI Joes. I watched my Thundercats. My Transformers, whatever. But I dominantly watched movies growing up. So Last Action Hero, the Terminators, the Rambos, the Rockies. That was more of my thing. So with that, growing up, like I had an NES, I had a few games, and one of the more notable games I had for the NES was Mega Man 3, which Mo and I have talked about quite a bit. Mega Man 3 is still to this day my favorite NES game. It's the NES game I probably have the most memories with, as it was the first NES game I ever beaten. I still have my original Mega Man 3 copy from when I was a kid. It's a very special game for me. But like we had other games. I remember watching my mom play the NES for just hours on end, and she would play Mega Man 3. She'd play Black Bass Fishing. She'd play Kings of the Beach. It's a volleyball game. But I was just enthralled by colors, the movement, the sounds. And I remember some games would literally give me shivers or like give me nightmares. One game in particular was Punch Out. I had a really hard time playing and watching Punch Out because every time you would lose, you'd hear that ding 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 ding, and then you hear that boom boom boom, like that shitty noise, and then like the enemy would make a sound effect. And the one that sticks out the most is Soda Pop. Soda Poppin would do his little feet shuffle, his little and then ha 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 ha, and then like laugh at you. And it was like it's still to this day, and I'm 35 years old, soon to be 36. Like that shit still gives me the heebie-jeebies when I have to listen to it because I lost a Soda Pop. But I remember these very very vividly. I was sitting, cross-legged on the floor or slaying on your stomach on the floor, and then we had two controllers. For the rare times I would actually play the game with my mother, controller one or player one always had a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Band-Aid wrapped around it, and it still has that Band-Aid wrapped around it to this day. That was how we always indicated which controller was plugged into slot one because the controller cables will always get tangled up. There was really no such thing as wireless controllers back then. There are exceptions, but for the most part, there wasn't wireless controllers then. So, but a large part of my NES playing was at friends' house. Mostly because like my childhood wasn't great. It was not unicorns and rainbows. I often tried to stay away from my house and my parents as much as I physically could. Um, but I would talk to my friends waiting for the bus, and then in the mornings or on the playground or in between classes, wherever we were hanging out, we'd always talk to each other. And we'd go to each other's houses. We played the NES games that we had, and then when we got kicked out of the house, we would take the said game, go over to the friend's house, pop it in, play through it again, or do whatever we were doing. So like if I was at the bus stop and I was playing Contra and I was hyping up Contra, my friend never played it. He's like, "Are you coming over today?" "Yeah, bring Contra." "All right." Bring Contra over. We sit there and play Contra for hours on end. Until you get to the point where like you bang your head against something because you keep dying, gaming over. Then you have to go outside and release some of that steam. And as kids of the 80s and 90s, we lived outside. So keeping us inside on a nice day was pretty impossible. So a lot of times when we played NES too, it was a rainy, dreary day, or it was just too hot to go outside. We definitely have had days like that. But still to this day, one of the most frustrating games that even at 35 years old, I cannot beat, and it frustrates me beyond normal capacity, is Mission Impossible for the NES. It's based off of the old TV show. And if you've ever played Mission Impossible NES, I would love to hear your experience with that game because, God, that game, even still to this day, is brutally difficult. But after a while, after a while, you're playing NES at your friend's place. You're drinking the little juices that came in like those little barrel containers with a foil top, it might not be a European thing, but if you're from America around that time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They came in red, blue, and I think green flavor. um, you're typically eating some sort of snack, whether it's like chip, it's probably chips, or if you had a pretty bougie friend, it might be like Dunkaroos or Oreos or something. But I remember one morning, going to the bus stop, and typically if we're going to the bus stop, like there's no video games, obviously, so like we're all kind of just like doing just dumb stuff. Like we're either sitting on the concrete, like reading a comic book, or we're playing tag, we're running around, we're just doing something because the bus stop was just long and tedious and dumb. But I remember one morning, um, I walked out to the bus stop and I see a bunch of kids like huddled around each other, and I was like, "Oh, what's going on?" And a lot of my friends. So I hurry up and run. I hurry up and run across the street, and one of my friends got a Game Boy. I was like, "Oh my god!" Things we've seen on the TV for months. My friend has one, so I was like, "Oh, holy shit!" Like you have a Game Boy, and he's playing Super Mario Land 1. So we're all familiar with Mario. Like, oh my god, he's playing Mario, on the Game Boy. We're getting on the, we're just hyping up. Like, we're trying to like huddle around this tiny screen, but still give him enough light so he can see the screen because the Game Boy wasn't backlit at all. So you had to have some sort of light beaming onto the screen so you can see what the heck was going on. And he had the sound up. You can hear all the sound effects. It was like heaven at the bus station, or at the bus stop rather. And we got on the bus, and it was a decently long bus ride. It was like a 10 to 15 minute bus ride, and we had it to the point where after a while he started sharing his Game Boy, where every time someone would die, we'd pass the Game Boy to somebody. So there was a group of like four of us. So like when I would die on stage 2-1, I'd pass the Game Boy over. They would go until they die. We passed the Game Boy over, and it was just like that. And that's just how things were. And I just remember just the idea of playing video games outside, on the go, just being portable with a video game was just mind blowing. Because I remember watching the commercials. Some of the earliest commercials I can remember was there was one in particular where there's a bunch of kids. Like the commercial is just super chaotic to begin with, but there's a bunch of kids. One of them's like cracking an egg into a bowl. The other kids in the background are just screaming about like a high score in an alleyway and this and that, whatever. And then they go to like a basketball court, and the kids are still screaming. It is just pure chaos of what's happening. And I remember another commercial was a Simpsons commercial, because at the time Simpsons was insanely popular, especially Bart. Um, and it was a Simpsons commercial where Bart was playing Bart versus the Space Mutants on the NES, which rough game, kind of fun but rough. And then he pops in Bart versus the World, and that's when Homer comes in, grabs him by the neck, throws him outside, and tells him to mow the lawn. And then Bart's like, "Yeah, right," pulls out his Game Boy and starts playing Camp Deadly. And then Homer takes the Game Boy away. And I was just like, man, like, imagine being able to play video games outside. Because A, we love being outside, and B, we love Nintendo. So now that my friend has a Game Boy, there is no reason for us to ever step foot in the house again unless it's maybe to go to the restroom. Because if we want to drink, we're just going to drink water from the hose and call it a day. So, and when we hung out outside, like we would hang out in like tree forts, or we'd be riding our bikes places, or we just doing just dumb things that we probably shouldn't be doing. But we're kids, and and our parents don't have ways to track us because there's not really cameras. Uh, everywhere at that time. So we had a lot of freedom in the 80s and 90s. So we're like, oh, we don't have to go outside and play video games. We can sit in a tree fort and we can play Super Mario Land. I think he had Tetris as well too. He had a few other games along with it. And I remember we would sit out there for hours and just play to the point where like it would start to get like dusk outside, so it was hard to see anything. And we would always try and figure out like ways to like shimmy light into like the tree house because there's no electricity outside where we are. So we'd always try to like figure out how to get like flashlights or like sneak flashlights out of our houses and things like that, just so we can keep playing the Game Boy in the tree fort. And we'd always take turns. Like if you die, you do this, or if you beat World One, you got to hand over the Game Boy. Um, yeah, it was just like a fantastic, just a phenomenal like just thing to have, a luxury one would call it. But so a bit more about my growing up because this is going to lead into how I get my Game Boy. So I grew up on the very east side of Ohio. I grew up south of a city called Youngstown, Ohio. I literally grew up on the Ohio River. And every summer, my dad would take us on a stupidly long road trip to Wisconsin, where my grandparents or his parents live. And mind you, this is about a 15-hour drive because we got to stop for food and gas and things like that. It's an incredibly boring drive because you're on the turnpike the entire time and it's just road and trees. The only time you get to see a city is when you hit Chicago. So as a kid, like I'm sitting in a car for a long time. I'm reading comic books. I'm rereading comic books. And as a kid, even as an adult, I have a really hard time sitting still. I hate it. It annoys me. It hurts my legs. I don't like sitting still. And even as a kid, especially the age of 4 or 5, even younger, I'm gonna drive my parents just crazy. I'm gonna be like singing, I'm gonna be whistling, I'm gonna be making weird noises, I'm gonna be asking if we're there yet. I am just going to drive my parents to the point of them hating me and probably wanting to drop me off on the side of the road. So I remember one summer. This was the faithful summer, July 17th, 1991. Um, I would be turning 4 years old, 5 years old. Five, yeah, no, 5 years old. And I get I still remember the birthday party. Crazy enough, I still remember the birthday party very vividly. Because at the time we were living in a trailer, and the trailer had this kind of like bar area where we had hanging baskets, which is where the very rare times we'd have fruit would be in the baskets. Typically, the baskets held dumb stuff like a wallet or like paper or mail or just whatever we threw up there. But the rare occasions it would have fruit, and I remember I remember waking up, going to the bar thingy, and I remember seeing my birthday cake. My birthday cake was a Raphael birthday cake. It was shaped like the turtle, and it said "Happy Birthday, Tony." I have the Polaroid of it somewhere in my apartment. Um, and I remember being stoked because I was like, "Oh, holy shit, Raphael birthday cake! This is sick!" Like I was already excited about the birthday cake. And I don't typically get excited for my birthdays. I've never been one to get excited for birthdays. Typically, my family never really celebrated my birthday growing up. So even still to this day, people ask me like, "What are you doing for your birthday?" I'm like, "I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to do the same thing I do the other 365 days of the year. It's just something I don't think about, and it's something I just never thought about. But for some reason, this I don't know why this birthday was a quote unquote special birthday. I mean, every year they would give me a birthday cake, but like it would be like a 2 hour thing and it'd be done. But this year it was different. It was all day, and we had people over, which was another rare thing to have. Because like for me, like for my birthday parties, it was just typically me, mom, and dad, maybe mom's side grandparents, maybe, but typically it was just me, mom, and dad. Um, so the fact that like I had like grandma and pap over, mom and dad. I think one of my aunts was with us at the time. Like we had people over for this. I was like, oh, holy, okay. Like this, it was weird. And I remember I got handed a square present, and it was I forgot what the wrapping paper was, but it was nicely wrapped. And I remember I tore one of the corners off on it, and it was that nice red logo that every kid my age wanted to see. It was the red oval that said Nintendo in it. I was like, oh my god. The first thing that pops in my head, I got a new game. I got a new NES game. I'm like, oh my god. I'm like, this could be Donkey Kong. This could be Operation C. This could be, I'm just like I'm running through the possibilities of games it could be, that I've seen on the TV or I've seen at the Kmart, wherever I've seen games. I'm like, oh, this could be this, it could be this, it could be this. And so like my heart is pumping at this point. My heart is going 1,000 miles an hour. I see Nintendo at 5 years old. I am ready to go. So I shred this paper off this thing, and I see it in big blue font, Game Boy. And it wasn't the pack-in Game Boy. It was the Game Boy with the pink like cross hatch background and stuff like that. So it was just the Game Boy. And I was like, oh my god, I have a Game Boy. I am screaming, I am jumping up and down. Like if like I'm probably running through the trailer at this point too. Like I am on cloud nine. I have a Game Boy. Which is something I never thought I would get. Just because like we never had money growing up. Like my family was pretty we're very very tight on money when I was growing up. So like the thought of me having a Game Boy prior to my birthday was just like it's never going to happen. But at least I have a friend that has one that I can play. But my fifth birthday, I get a Game Boy. I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing. And then so like I'm losing my shit. And then they hand me another present. It was another square present. I was like, oh my god, what can I'm in my head? I'm like, it's an NES game. It's Operation C. It's whatever. And I didn't even hesitate on this one. I just rampaged the paper right off of it, and it was probably the fastest I've ever unwrapped a present. And it was a game for the Game Boy, and it was Balloon Kid. So if you ever listen to the Lite episode of Balloon Kid has always had a very special place in my heart because Balloon Kid is the first Game Boy game I ever owned. So Balloon Kid will always and forever have a special place in my heart. It may not be the greatest game in the world, but it is a pretty damn good game. So I have Balloon Kid. I'm like, oh my god, so I'm like, I'm pretty sure I tore the box open. Like I'm pretty sure I didn't like gently lift the flap up. I'm pretty sure I ripped that box open. I still have the manual for Balloon Kid though, oddly enough. The OG, like my old manual, like I somehow kept it. But I know I don't have the box anymore. And I remember I like took the game, like, oh, these games are so small, like they're cool. And I'm like, I've never heard of Balloon Kid before, but the girl's about to get eaten by a fish and there's fire in the background. I bet this game is badass. And And like I put it in, and I'm just like I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, oh my god, I have a Game Boy with a game. Like this is sick. And then they hand me one more package. And in my head, I'm just like, oh my god, it's a smaller box. I'm like, this can only be one thing. And I look over, I'm like, batteries. Sure enough, I rip open the packaging, batteries. And they're not the cheap batteries that last like 2 hours. These were energizers. So someone splurged on the good stuff. And I had energizer batteries for my Game Boy. I was like, oh my god. And I popped in those four double A's into the back of my Game Boy. I put Balloon Kid in. I ran to our shitty, gross, gray looking couch and I sat there and I played Game Boy for hours. Um, I didn't beat Balloon Kid at all that day, but I played the shit out of it. And that was probably still to this day, 30 years later, the best birthday I think I've ever had. And then I got, I had to get up, I had to blow the candles out of my Raphael birthday cake. And I remember some other notable presents I got that year was Skippo. I'm a big fan of card games, which is going to play a big role in this story much later on. But I'm a big fan of card games. I like games like Skippo and Uno and things like that. So I got Skippo and Uno and a deck of cards for my birthday that year as well too, because I really enjoyed cards. I still do. But the spotlight though was the Game Boy, and man, I was just ecstatic. So for the next few years, we'd go on road trips, and we'd always have to make sure we buy a pack of batteries. That way I didn't drive my parents up a wall whenever we were doing any type of long drives. And I took my Game Boy everywhere. I eventually got a carrying case for it. Um, my grandparents on my mom's side eventually bought me a black Game Boy bag. That can because I took my Game Boy everywhere with me. I took it out to friends' house. I took it to school. I Whenever we would go on like if the drive was longer than like 20 minutes, I take it with us on the drive. I took it everywhere, and so it got to the point where my grandparents just bought me a Game Boy Black like travel bag, and I I I know I still have it here somewhere, but I don't 100% know where it's at. I would love to see the wear and tear on it though. But yeah, I mean, I took it everywhere. I played it all the time, and I only played it. And I only had two games that I can recall. It was Tetris and it was Balloon Kid. I didn't get Mario Land 1 or anything like that until much later into the Game Boy, my Game Boy ownership. Um, like after a while, like I would start getting allowance because I was growing up. So like once I was like 6 or 7, I would start getting an allowance for like taking out trash, washing dishes, doing whatever. And we'd go to the flea market once a month, and the flea market was like an hour and a half drive away. But we would go to the flea market once a month, and there was always a table that sold video games. And I would always take my allowance, and I would go and buy various video games from the table. And mind you, like at the time, you would buy video games for pennies of the dollar. I remember I bought. This is going to make a lot of people mad. I bought The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time gold cart, so the collector's edition cart, for $1 at a flea market back in 1990, back in like what 1999 or 2000. Um, that's just how it was. Like games were not really. Like people had them, but like no one knew the worth of them. So I remember I bought games like Super Mario Land for like 25 cents. I bought Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening for like 50 cents, things like that. Um, as time progressed, like I would use my allowance to buy some Game Boy games, but at the start I had Balloon Kid and Tetris, and I as a kid really didn't play Tetris all that much. That was more for mom and dad because they were obsessed with that game. But with that, we're going to take a quick short break because it's been 40 minutes already. And we're going to dive into the second half of my Game Boy ownership. This is where things really kind of turn up the heat. So stay tuned. All right, welcome back, everyone. So yeah, like I said, eventually over time, I would build up my Game Boy library. Nothing to what it is today, but I had games to choose from at that point. I had Mario Land 3, I had Mario Land, I had Godzilla. Like I had games to choose from, but like we're fast forwarding here, and like the games were good, but like and I would still take the Game Boy on road trips or like really long drives. But it's getting to the point where like I'm growing older, my priorities are shifting, my interests are shifting, and we're hitting a time where like it's just not Nintendo anymore. It's now like it's Nintendo, it's Sega, Atari is trying to come back. There's this thing called a PlayStation that's being rumored in magazines. Tiger Electronics, like these like $20 handheld things, like on the end caps of the toy aisle. Technology was just moving, and so was I. So my Game Boy would lay pretty dormant for a while. Um, that is until 1998 and 1999. So by this time in my life, childhood, I'm a very different kid as well. My parents are divorced. They divorced when I was 10. So that would have been 1997. And I live with my dad. My grandparents, for the most part, are raising me. I'm still living in Ohio at the time, so my grandparents are my mom's parents. They're basically raising me because the old man's working multiple jobs to try and make ends meet for us. And again, just my priorities as a kid have shifted. Me and my friends. The nice way of putting it is, me and my friends were the kids that your parents would tell you to stay away from. We were the troublemakers, so to speak. Um, we grew up on the wrong side of the railroad tracks. If people understand what that saying means. Um, but video games at this point were just not top of mind for me, although I did still play them. Um, this is a period where I got really into wrestling. So I'm talking like WCW, WWF, Attitude Era, Stone Cold, The Rock, Triple H, Sting, Goldberg. Like I was hell bent into wrestling. If wrestling was on, I was watching it. If I couldn't watch wrestling, I found ways to watch wrestling. Um, every Monday night, I'd flip between TNT to watch WCW, and I would flip to USA to watch WWF. On Sunday night, I'd watch Sunday Night Heat and the WWF, and then Saturday mornings, I would watch the recap. I forgot what they called it. It was like WWF like Superstars or something like that. It was on really early in the morning. It was a recap of the week of what happened. and then eventually Thursdays would be WWF SmackDown. So I watched the shit out of wrestling growing up. Um, so logically, it just made sense that I would play wrestling games as well. So dominantly, my video game playing was sports and wrestling games. So I was getting really into sports this time too. I was playing football, basketball, baseball. I was just a very active kid, and so of course, so of course the games, even now to this day, have a lot of nostalgia for me. So like whenever I play like WWF No Mercy or WrestleMania 2000, or if you guys caught my stream a few weeks ago where we're playing SmackDown 2 on the, or SmackDown 1 or SmackDown 2 on the PlayStation 1, um, like you saw a lot of nostalgia in the stream. Like I was like, oh my god, like I forgot all about this wrestler. This person's here now in life, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Wrestling games still to this day bring me a ton of nostalgia. Even the newer wrestling games, if they have modes for like, for instance, WWE 13 has an Attitude Era mode. Just playing that just brings so much memories because it's like, well, Mankind off the Hell in a Cell, Undertaker choke slams Rikishi off the Hell in a Cell into the back of the truck. Mankind wins his first WWF title, and Degeneration X is coming through, and like there's just so many memories that gets jostled. And I remember like me and my friends, we'd always do the create a wrestler, and we'd create a wrestler, wrestle each other in the game, and we'd get mad at each other. Then we'd stunner each other in real life, or rock bottom each other in real life onto a bed or something, so we didn't get hurt. This wrestling had I have a lot of memories and nostalgia with this wrestling in general. But games like Mario, Zelda, Metroid, like those games were just not an interest for me anymore. Although I would play Ocarina of Time, I would still play the games. They just were not a focus for me. I like me and my friend group. We wanted raw action. We wanted suggestive themes. Like we were growing up, and we wanted to feel grown up. Um, I remember one day during recess, it was raining outside, so we didn't go out. We weren't allowed to go outside. Um, I saw some kids pull out like this, like, so we call them a pencil box or a pencil case. I don't know what they're called anymore, but it's like a little plastic box. It's, I don't know, maybe 8 inches long by about 5 inches wide and about 2 or 3 inches deep. And there's a little plastic flap on the front that you unhook and you can lift it up. And typically it's where you store your pencils, your erasers, your pens, and stuff like that. But we had a couple kids in class that had these. And they pull them out and open them up, and they had toys and cards and stuff inside of them. Now, mind you, so like we had a few kids in class that were very much into Japanese media or just Asian media in general. So like the old like Toho Godzilla stuff, or Dragon Ball Z, Doraemon, things like that. And again, mind you, like this is 1998, 1999. The internet is still very much in its infancy, and finding Japanese media in America, especially where I lived in America, was incredibly difficult. Um, so I remember going over and just curiosity, because this is how I live life, by curiosity. And I remember seeing cards, like playing cards, with cartoon characters on them, some of them being matte, some of them being shiny, some of them having this super cool looking artwork on them, numbers, symbols, like there's a bunch of stuff on them. And I remember I asked them, I was like what game is this? And they go, oh, it's not a game, we're trading cards. And I'm just like, what? Like it was a foreign concept to me. Like I grew up with Pogs, but like I kind of grew up on like the tail end of Pogs. So like I never traded Pogs. I played Pogs, but I never like traded them. I never got really into Pogs because I like I said I grew up on the tail end of it. Um, so like they're trading cards. I didn't understand what that meant. So like they were physically swapping cards. Like one person had an extra of this card, and they would trade it for whatever card this other person had. It just didn't make sense to me. So I was like, oh, what are these numbers and stuff? And you're like, oh, this is how much damage this card can do. I was like, oh, so it's a game. They're like, yeah, it can be, but we just sit there and we trade them. I'm like, okay. Like, I just didn't understand it, but I loved the art of the cards. I thought the art on the cards was absolutely just phenomenal. And and I was intrigued still. So I kept asking questions, and one of the kids eventually just gave me a Bulbasaur card and told me to go away. Because I was just annoying them because I was curious about this thing. And I was just annoying them, and they said, "I'll give you this card if you go away." And it was a Bulbasaur card. I'll never forget it. I used to still have it until I recently got rid of all my Pokemon cards. Um, but I remember, so I had this Bulbasaur card, and I didn't think much of it, but it looked cool. I liked the artwork, and I kept it on my desk at home. And I remember one morning I woke up early enough to catch cartoons. Mind you, 1998, 1999, I'm 11 or 12 years old. Um, I sleep till noon at this point. I sleep till noon at around this point. In my growing up life, and I went grabbed my bowl of cereal, whatever it may have been, and went to go watch TV. And I remember it plain as day. It was some sort of commercial. I forgot what the commercial was, but when the commercial turned off, it was that loud guitar riff, the boom, and then the drum, the bum dum bum dum bum dum. I was like, oh, what the hell is this? Like super catchy theme of a cartoon I've never seen before, with crazy vibrant colors. So I'm like, okay, like I've never seen this. Like what's going on here? And then after a few seconds, it hits the power that's inside and then Pokemon. I'm like, okay, well, I'm watching a Pokemon cartoon. So put two and two together. Eventually, I'm like, okay, well, Pokemon is a cartoon that has a card game based after it. I'm like, all right, it's interesting. So I sat there and watched the cartoon. I forgot what episode it was, but I remember not being very impressed with the cartoon at all. I liked the intro, but I thought the cartoon as a whole was pretty meh. It was nothing worth waking up for. It was no Yu-Gi-Oh. Let's just put it that way. Because I'm a bigger fan of Yu-Gi-Oh than I am Pokemon. But as time went on, Pokemon started becoming more and more popular. So more and more kids at the school had these cards, and they would talk about the cartoon. They would talk about the Pokemon as if they're like a real thing. They would have little toys and keychains that would hang from their backpacks. Um, it was a thing, and I am a sucker for things. So I remember I used my allowance money, and I bought a pack of Pokemon cards. And this pack had Charizard on the front of it because Charizard was the most badass looking of the three starting Pokemon. And I open it up, and I felt, I don't know how to describe the feeling, but I felt like this is fun because, like, although they're just little pieces of cardboard, I'm like, this is really cool because they have little numbers on them out of like whatever. So like 23 out of like 210. So you had the quote unquote catch 'em all sense. And I remember like looking through them all. Like I got like a Pikachu, and I was looking at it. I'm like, Well, that thing is kind of dumb looking, but like it's kind of cool at the same time because it's yellow, has some lightning bolts on it. And I remember I got like a Ratata and stuff like that. Then I get to my holographic, my shiny card. I got a Machamp, and I was like, dude, this thing looks sick. Four giant bicep arms. The thing just looks mean in general. I'm like, dude, this thing is a badass. Like, this is probably the greatest card to ever exist. And at that point, I was hooked on the Pokemon cards. That one pack alone hooked me on the card aspect of Pokemon. So I remember I would spend my allowance on Pokemon cards all the time. It was a problem. If rehab existed back then for Pokemon cards, I would have needed to go to Pokemon card rehab. It was bad, and then I got into the Pokemon card trading and this and that, whatever. I even eventually learned how to play the Pokemon card game. It was a ride. It was a thrill because like you never knew what you were going to get in the pack. You might get a duplicate, or you might get some badass card. And it was like, oh my god, this is so cool. And we had a card shop in town where if you bought your pack, opened your pack in the card shop, and pulled a rare card, you got your name on the wall. Like, so and so pulled out a Charizard, so and so pulled out a Lapras, so and so pulled out a whatever it may have been. Like, you got your name on the wall. So like, big deal. But it was so like I was hooked on Pokemon cards from that one pack. I was hooked. So I was like, all right, I get the Pokemon card aesthetic now. Like I said, I just recently sold all of my Pokemon cards, all of my first generation Pokemon cards. And I had a ton of them, more than I thought actually. So I thought I'd give the cartoon another shot. I was like, you know what? I understand the cards now. Let's see if I can understand the cartoon. So I gave the cartoon another shot, and I remember the episode that I watched. It was the episode where Ash was fighting Misty for the Cascade badge, and Ash had a Butterfree out against Misty's Staryu, the unevolved version of the Starfish Pokemon. And I watched it, and I was like, I still don't like the cartoon. Even to this day, I still don't like the cartoon. I think the cartoon is extremely mediocre. Um, I am just not a fan of the cartoon. But I remember the commercial during said episode, and this was the first time I've ever seen, or this would be the first time I would learn that there is a Pokemon game. The commercial was Pikachu climbing onto a bus that was already full of Pokemon, and the bus driver drives like a maniac to a back alley and smashes the bus into a blue Game Boy Pocket. And the commercial was like, you too can catch them all. Buy the packs today and you can collect all 150. And it showed Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue next to the Game Boy. And I was like, holy shit. There is a Pokemon game. And my first initial thoughts, because it didn't show any gameplay, my first initial thoughts was the Pokemon trading card game is on the Game Boy. Like, I don't have to buy cards anymore. I can buy the game and play the cards on the game. I'm like, holy hell, this could be huge. Needless to say, that was not the case. They do eventually come out with a trading card game for the Game Boy Color, but so I was like, oh my god, like I want it. That was the first time I was like, oh my god, like I want this game, and it was a Game Boy game. So I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of sick. But I didn't have any money. I kept spending my allowance on Game Boy game or on Pokemon cards, so I didn't have any money. It's going to be a running theme, me not having money, especially as a kid. Um, but one of the kids, one of the Pokemon kids at school had the games. A bunch of kids did, both red and blue. So it'd be the first time I would actually see a link cable being used on a Game Boy as well too. I get to see a link cable in use. I get to see kids fight each other's Pokemon, trade Pokemon. I get to see how the game actually is somewhat played. So I made a deal with my dad. I was like, "Hey, if I can make the honor roll, if I can make the honor roll, and mind you, I am not an honor roll student. I am a B. I am a C average student. Um, but I do make the honor roll. I hold up my end. I make the honor roll. So I get Pokemon Red, and I played it for hours. I eventually caught every Pokemon you could catch in Pokemon Red. I even caught multiples of some of them so I can trade them with classmates. Then we would talk about Mew, like, oh my, like you gotta go and move the truck on this island, and Mew is underneath the truck, and oh my god, like it was the old feeling of talking about video games and glitches and just being a part of like the video game culture was back again. And and like that feeling was there for a long, long time, because Pokemon and it was because of Pokemon that brought it back, which was crazy to think. Um and a game that, I'd have a Game Boy in 1991 and a game in 1998, 1999 would bring it back full circle again. Um but I wouldn't get that feeling again from the Game Boy, unfortunately, because Pokemon was one of the last games I ever got for the OG Game Boy growing up. As I grew older, the Game Boy would get tossed into a box with the games, and games like SmackDown, um, any type of wrestling game, honestly, in general, or any type of sports game like Madden, basketball, whatever it may be, took way more priority in terms with video games than anything else because that's just what I was more into. My video game playing in general would just dwindle down to almost nothing as I spent more time outside with friends and just outside in general. Because it got to the point where, like, if we had a Game Boy with us, chances are it's probably gonna get lost or broken because we were just doing really dumb stuff. The older we got, the more reckless we were getting. So, and our interests were shifting. We were getting to the point where we were teenagers. We were getting to that point where girls didn't have nasty cooties anymore, and just things were changing. But we always still had wrestling games to fall back to, and I still played the Game Boy on road trips because there was nothing else to do. um, but but then we fast forward, so 1999. So let's say 2000 to 2016. 2016 is when I picked up Game Boy Adventure, where I started to rekindle the love of the Game Boy because I was speedrunning Kirby's Dream Land. So I started speedrunning Kirby's Dream Land in 2015. 2015? 2014, 2015. I started speedrunning Kirby's Dream Land. And I like the game. I still like the game to this day. Still top 5 Game Boy games for me. But I wanted to, I was like, you know what? Like, what else is out there on the Game Boy? Like, what else did I miss growing up? And that was when I came across Moelle, the Game Boy community, Bagheera. Um, and I saw that they had lists of Game Boy games that they're playing through and whatnot. And I remember seeing some of the titles, and I'm like, oh, I still have that game and this, that, whatever. And it got to the point where I was like, you know what? I really want to I want to see what I missed out on because like I said, like I didn't have money growing up, so I couldn't buy any game that I saw Um, I grew up in a time where like I just played outside nonstop, so video games sometimes just were not top priority for me. um, and some of the games we just didn't even know about because some of them didn't have commercials, or like you look at the front cover, it looked stupid, so you didn't want to play it. So in 2016, I picked up Game Boy Adventure, and I started playing through Game Boy games. And we fast forward from 2016 to 2023. Yeah, we're in 2023 now. I have played a total of. Let me look here. I have played a total of. I've played a total of 238 Game Boy games. So, I'm nowhere near the level of, Grounded Hero or Moelle On or anyone like that, but 238 Game Boy games is nothing to scoff at. And I don't regret playing them at all. Even the really crappy games that I did play, I'm actually happy that I played them because it gave me an experience. It showed me that not everything was spectacular on the Game Boy. There was some real trash on that handheld, but there were also some really cool games on the handheld that I missed out on, and I plan to keep playing more Game Boy games, pressing forward. And it's even cooler now is that in 2022, 2021, we'll say 2020, COVID 2020 to now, like there's been so many new homebrew games for the Game Boy, like Dedius and Pine Creek and all of Green Boy's games like Shapeshifter 1 and 2. And there's just been such an influx in homebrew Game Boy stuff that it's actually kind of nostalgic to see like a resurgence of Game Boy games coming to life for the Game Boy again. And it's been really fun because like even though I don't get to see my friends face to face like Mullah or Grounded Hero or Bengara, I get to talk to them in Discord as if we were hanging out every single day. It's like we sit there and we talk about the game, we hype up the game, we try to convince each other to play the game, we challenge each other, we talk about glitches that we find. Like it's it definitely pulls back some of that old nostalgia from 1991 and 1999 when playing the various Game Boy games. So I'm excited about the future of Game Boy or handheld in general, whether it is through the Switch, whether it is through, a FPGA emulator like Analog or Mister or something like that. I'm always excited about the future of old retro stuff because there's always going to be a want for it. And there's always going to be an interest for it, especially the generations that are coming up now. Like my generation really put forth Nintendo. The generation after me really put forth Xbox and PlayStation. So it's really exciting to see a lot of that stuff come back into fruition again between Xbox, PlayStation, Sega, Nintendo, Atari, etc. But yeah, with that, we're going to take another quick break, and then we'll do our sweet ass outro, so stay tuned. All right, welcome back, everybody. Sweet ass outro time. So yeah, if you're wondering why my voice is probably a little tired, it's also 3:41 in the morning. I hadn't slept yet, but I needed to get this Lite episode out. So, we got some marathon stuff coming up here. So we got summer games done quick, or games done quick in general. That's happening May 28th through June 4th. I will be there. I will not be running any games, unfortunately. I did not get any games into the event. But we do have some games and some people that we all should 100% check out. Let's see here. So if you're into the GBA stuff, we have The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventure being co-op ran between TGH and Amber Cyprian? I don't know how to pronounce the last name. Is that the only handheld we got going on here? It might be the only handheld. That is the only handheld, it looks like. Pretty cool. Yeah, that's the only handheld. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. I forgot what I submitted. I submitted Ruby and Rusty, Red Bow, Shaq Fu, of course, and Jazz Jackrabbit for the GBA. But some runners to keep an eye out for. Obviously, all the RGL runners. Congratulations to all those that did get in. We have L Rock, and they're doing X-Men Arcade. Co-op with Metroid Master. Gygus Blues and Crack Attack. Two of my good friends are doing co-op Wild Guns for the SNES. There's so many people. So many good runners. I would just say go hop over to gamesdonequick.com and check out the game list and see what games got in, all the runners. Yeah, be a good time. Also, we have Retrothon 2023 happening April 23rd through April 30th. That schedule has been released, so definitely go check that out if you are in the RGL Discord, or check it out on the Retro Gaming Live Twitter. I'll be doing Jazz Jackrabbit. Yeah, Jazz Jackrabbit for the GBA. But we have a lot of awesome games happening that weekend, so definitely make sure, or that week rather, to check it out. Looks like Enemy is starting the whole thing off with Final Fight, so you already know it's gonna be a banger, especially since we have Final Fight 2 and 3 afterwards. And then we have some more, because we're getting into marathon season. Power Up with Pride has opened up their run submissions. They will be, let's see here. Their marathon will be running from June 23rd. Yeah, okay. June 23rd to June 25th. So they'll be doing a weekend long marathon. Their submissions, like I said, are open right now. I don't know when they close. Trying to find that info. Yeah, I don't see when the submissions close, but they do have the stuff open right now. So go submit to that and go check that out if you so wish. Other than that, there are many other more marathons happening around. It's just hard to keep track of them all. So Twitter is going to be your best friend for stuff like that. So go check Twitter, go check Speedrunners, go check speedrun.com. They all kind of usually announce any type of major or big speedrun marathon happening. Beyond that, if you have any suggestions, feedback, or anything of the sort, we would love to hear it. I know we've been quiet in Discord. I know we've been quiet in general lately. I think we've been busy, but we will always make time to listen and talk to all of you. If it wasn't for all of you, we wouldn't be doing this still to this day. It's been a blast, honestly. But you can find me, eBloodyCandy, on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok. You can find my sidekick Moelle, Moelleuh, on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. And you can find our awesome, wonderful producer, Sprinting Legs on Twitch and Twitter, and Legs on YouTube. And her project website, www.sprintinglegs.com. We have a Patreon. So if you would like to be a patron, we do have tiers available where it gives you sneak peeks to notes and bloopers and premieres to what we call Haunt Hunters, which is a Let's Play series of Mo and I playing horror games. So if that's a thing that you like, we do give early access premieres to that. Special discount codes for the merch shop, uh, things like that. And you get special access and Discord as well too, so you can see and hear some things that non-patrons don't get to see or hear. If subscription-based things aren't your thing, since everything in this world is subscription-based, and you use PayPal, sorry, a car alarm just went off, and you want to use PayPal, let one of the three of us know. We want to thank you and reward you for supporting us, and we can't type PayPal into Discord, so we can't figure that out. So please let one of us know. We want to thank you in some fashion. We know money's tight. Inflation, the world itself is in a crazy place. That's fine. Listening to the podcast, giving us 5-star ratings, saying that EBC is probably the greatest podcast host to ever grace the world is more than enough support to get us where we need to get to. The more listens we get, the more reviews that we get, the higher up we get onto podcast lists. And especially this being such a niche podcast like the Game Boy, it's actually pretty damn cool that, we are where we are. Also, we're going to keep selling out. We do have a merch store. So if you do want a t-shirt, coffee cup, I'm trying to get Mo to approve some stickers and whatever else. We have a merch shop. It's merch.thisisgameboy.com. And you can find all that information along with our social media links on thisisgameboy.com. So with all of that said, the next time you hear from me, I will be with Moelle. We will be talking about Super Mario Land 3, Wario Land. And yeah. Until next time, have a fantastic rest of your weekend, week, night, month. Until the next time we talk. And like I said, very different episode than typical, but it's fun to do these, especially since we all have very different experiences with the Game Boy and retro gaming in general. But yeah, until next time, thank you all for listening. Ta-ta.
See, these are things that Lex just got